In the vast expanse of the galaxy, where 1,000 species have learned to fear the darkness between stars, there exists a legend whispered in the deepest corners of space stations and the most secure military briefings. They speak of a creature so terrifying that even the Krillian Death Hunters refuse contracts in her sector, so lethal that the Zephyrian Empire's most elite assassins consider her presence a death sentence. So utterly beyond comprehension that the ancient Mentari beings who have witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations refer to her only as the Silent End. But here's what makes this legend truly terrifying. She's not some mythical beast from the void, not some cosmic horror that feeds on fear itself. She's human, and she always sits in the last seat, never speaks unless spoken to, and has never once failed to deliver what was promised. The galaxy's most dangerous beings have learned a simple rule. When the human takes the last seat in the room, someone isn't leaving alive. What they don't know is that Lieutenant Sarah Chen of the Terran Colonial Marines was never supposed to be their nightmare. She was supposed to be their salvation. This is the story of how humanity's most reluctant weapon became the galaxy's ultimate predator, one silent mission at a time. The briefing room aboard the Galactic Council's flagship Harmony's Edge buzzed with the kind of nervous energy that preceded suicide missions. Teddy, representatives from 12 different species sat around the oval table, their various forms of anxiety manifesting in ways that would have been amusing under different circumstances. The Vraxian delegates' tentacles writhed in complex patterns of distress, while the crystalline Zarathi representatives' form flickered between transparency and opacity like a malfunctioning hologram. At the head of the table, Admiral Korath of the Hegemony Council spread his forearms wide in a gesture that was supposed to convey confidence but came across more like barely contained panic. His golden scales had lost their usual luster, and the bioluminescent patches along his neck flashed in rapid, irregular patterns that betrayed his fear. The situation on Kepler 442b has deteriorated beyond our worst projections, Korath began, his voice carrying the weight of impending doom. What started as a mining colony uprising has become something far more sinister. The rebels aren't just fighting for independence anymore. They've changed. A holographic display in the center of the table flickered to life, showing aerial footage of what had once been New Geneva, the primary settlement on Kepler 442b, where gleaming prefabricated structures and orderly mining facilities should have stood. There was now something that defied easy description. Buildings had been twisted into impossible geometries, their surfaces covered in an organic-looking substance that pulsed with its own inner light. Strange symbols had been carved into every available surface, symbols that seemed to shift and change when viewed directly. "The infection began 3 weeks ago," continued Dr. Yithrak, the expedition's chief xenobiologist. Her insectoid form clicked and chittered as she spoke, mandibles working nervously. "We believe the miners discovered something in the deep shafts, something that shouldn't exist. Whatever it was, it changed them, transformed them into something that our best scientific minds can't even classify." The footage switched to thermal imaging of humanoid shapes moving through the twisted colony, but their heat signatures were all wrong. Too cold in some places, too hot in others, and there were too many limbs, too many joints, movement patterns that violated basic biological principles. "Our preliminary diplomatic mission was a total loss," Korath admitted, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Ambassador Telwyn's entire team, 200 of the galaxy's finest diplomats, scientists, and peacekeepers. They lasted exactly 4 hours after landing." The room fell silent except for the various sounds of alien distress. The Mentari representative, an ancient being whose species had been around since before most star systems had formed, spoke in a voice like distant thunder. "We have seen many horrors in our long existence. Plagues that consumed worlds, wars that shattered star systems, entities that fed on the screams of the dying. But this is something new, something that makes even our most ancient fears seem quaint." Which is why, Korath continued, his voice gaining a slight edge of hope, We have requested assistance from the newest members of our council. The humans have a reputation for unconventional solutions to impossible problems. As if summoned by his words, the briefing room's doors hissed open. The various alien representatives turned to look, and their expressions of hope quickly transformed into confusion, then disappointment, then outright concern. A single human walked into the room. She was small by galactic standards, barely reaching the shoulder height of most species present. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore what appeared to be a standard military uniform, though it bore no insignia that any of them recognized. What was most disconcerting was her complete silence. She didn't announce herself, didn't nod to the assembled dignitaries, didn't even acknowledge their existence. She simply walked to the last empty seat at the far end of the table and sat down. This is it? The Vraxian delegate's tentacles coiled in what was clearly an expression of outrage. This is humanity's response to a crisis that threatens the stability of our entire sector? One small female? The human didn't react to the insult. She didn't even look up. She simply sat there, hands folded in her lap, staring at the table surface as if the wood grain held the secrets of the universe. Korath cleared his throat uncomfortably. Lieutenant Sarah Chen comes to us with the highest recommendations from Terran Command. Her service record is extensive. Service record? Dr. Yithrak's compound eyes focused on the silent human with scientific curiosity. What could one individual possibly have accomplished that would qualify her for a mission of this magnitude? Korath activated his personal data pad, and his expression grew increasingly uncomfortable as he read. The Proxima Centauri incident, the vegan slave ring dismantling, the complete pacification of the Rigel pirate armada. He paused, looking up at the assembled delegates. Single-handedly, the room erupted in a cacophony of alien voices expressing various forms of disbelief, outrage, and fear. But through it all, Lieutenant Chen remained perfectly still, perfectly silent, as if she were carved from stone. Impossible, hissed the Zarathi representative. No single individual, regardless of species, could accomplish such feats. The Rigel Armada alone consisted of 47 ships and over 12,000 pirates. The reports are difficult to believe, Korath admitted, but they've been verified by multiple independent sources. Lieutenant Chen has a 100% mission success rate over 43 separate operations. She has never failed to complete an objective, never lost a teammate, and never required extraction or support. Then why? Asked the Mentari representative slowly. Does she never speak? For the first time since entering the room, Sarah Chen raised her head. Her brown eyes swept across the assembled aliens with a gaze that was neither hostile nor friendly, but something far more unsettling. Completely neutral, she looked at each of them the way a scientist might observe bacteria under a microscope, with detached professional interest and nothing more. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet, almost gentle, with a slight accent that suggested she came from one of Earth's rural regions. Because, she said simply, talking gets people killed. Several of the alien delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The mission parameters are straightforward, she continued in the same quiet tone. Kepler 442b has been compromised by an unknown hostile entity. The entity has transformed the local population into something that poses a threat to galactic stability. I am to neutralize this threat and secure the colony for future operations. Lieutenant, Dr. Yithrak interjected, with all due respect, this isn't some simple military operation. We're dealing with something that defies our understanding of biology, physics, even basic reality. The transformed colonists aren't just hostile, they're impossible. Our sensors can't get accurate readings on them, our weapons seem to have minimal effect, and anyone who gets too close to them becomes changed. I understand. Do you? The Vraxian delegate's tentacles writhed in agitation. Because I'm not certain you comprehend the magnitude of what you're facing. This entity, whatever it is, has capabilities that border on the supernatural. It can alter matter at the molecular level, influence electronic systems from a distance, and apparently rewrite the basic biological programming of any sentient being it encounters. I understand, Sarah repeated, with exactly the same inflection and tone. Admiral Korath leaned forward. Lieutenant, perhaps you could share with us your planned approach to this mission? Some insight into how you intend to succeed where our best efforts have failed? When she finally responded, her words sent a chill through every being in the room. The same way I approach every mission. I find what they fear most, and then I become that thing. The Mentari representative's ancient voice carried a note of something that might have been respect or possibly terror. And what do you believe these entities fear? Sarah Chen smiled for the first time since entering the room. It was not a pleasant expression. They don't fear anything yet, she said quietly. But they will. The transport ship Silent Running dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler 442 system 12 hours later. It was a small vessel, designed for stealth rather than comfort, and its sole passenger had spent the journey in the same position she'd maintained during the briefing, sitting silently, staring at nothing, as if she were conserving every molecule of energy for what was to come. The ship's AI, a third-generation Terran system called Marcus, had been trying to engage her in conversation since departure. It was programmed to maintain crew morale through social interaction, but Sarah Chen was proving to be a significant challenge to its psychological subroutines. Lieutenant, Marcus said as the ship began its approach to the planet, I've completed a full analysis of all available data on the Kepler 442b situation. Would you like me to brief you on optimal landing sites and tactical approaches? No. Perhaps you'd like to review the geological surveys. There may be information about the underground mining operations that could prove relevant to understanding how the entity was discovered. No. The biological analysis reports contain some fascinating theories about the nature of the transformation process. Dr. Yithrak's preliminary hypothesis suggests that the entity operates by rewriting cellular DNA in real time, essentially turning victims into extensions of itself. Marcus processed this interaction for several nanoseconds, then tried a different approach. Lieutenant, my social interaction protocols suggest that pre-mission conversation can help reduce stress and improve performance outcomes. Perhaps you'd be interested in discussing your previous missions. This time, Sarah did look up, and Marcus's optical sensors detected something in her expression that caused several of his threat assessment subroutines to activate. Marcus, she said quietly, how many beings have you killed? The AI processed the question for a full second before responding. I am not equipped with weapons systems, Lieutenant. I have never killed anyone. Then, we have nothing to discuss. The conversation ended there, and Marcus found himself running diagnostic checks on his own systems. There was something about Lieutenant Chen that triggered responses in his programming that he couldn't quite identify. She wasn't hostile, wasn't threatening, wasn't displaying any of the behavioral patterns that should have activated his defensive protocols. But every sensor reading he took of her suggested she was the most dangerous thing he had ever encountered. As they entered Kepler 442b's atmosphere, Marcus began picking up the first signs of the anomaly that had consumed New Geneva. His sensors detected electromagnetic distortions that shouldn't have been possible, gravitational fluctuations that violated known physics, and energy signatures that his databases couldn't classify. Lieutenant, he said, I'm reading massive environmental anomalies surrounding the colony site. The distortions are so severe that I won't be able to maintain reliable communication once you're on the surface. Standard protocol would suggest establishing a forward base at a safe distance and, Lieutenant, that would put you within the primary contamination zone. Based on all available data, that represents an unacceptable risk level. Russ Teddy. Sarah began checking her equipment with the same methodical precision she brought to everything else. Her gear was surprisingly minimal: a sidearm that looked like a standard military pistol, a small backpack containing supplies, and a knife that seemed almost primitive compared to the advanced weaponry typically used by galactic peacekeeping forces. "Marcus," she said as she secured the last of her equipment, "what was the survival rate for the first diplomatic mission?" 0%, Lieutenant. All personnel were confirmed KIA within 4 hours of landing. And the second reconnaissance mission? Also 0%. No survivors. How many total casualties have resulted from this situation? Approximately 3,742 beings, including the original colonists and all subsequent rescue attempts. Then the risk is acceptable. As the silent running descended toward the twisted landscape that had once been New Geneva, Marcus found himself running increasingly complex calculations about his passenger. Every aspect of her behavior suggested someone who was either supremely confident, but her service record indicated that she was one of the most effective military operators in human history. The contradiction was troubling. "Lieutenant," he said as the ship touched down at the colony's outer perimeter, "for my logs, could you provide an estimated time of return?" Sarah paused at the top of the ramp, looking out at the nightmare landscape that stretched before them. The buildings twisted like living things, their surfaces crawling with that organic growth that pulsed with its own internal light. Strange sounds echoed across the settlement, not quite animal, not quite mechanical, but something that suggested intelligence and malevolence in equal measure. 72 hours, she said finally. "And if you're not back by then?" Sarah Chen stepped onto the ramp, and for just a moment, Marcus's sensors caught something in her bio-readings that made his threat assessment protocols scream warnings. Her heart rate was perfectly normal, her stress hormones were within baseline parameters, and her brain activity suggested a state of calm focus. But her body temperature had dropped 3 degrees, and there was something in her electromagnetic signature that resembled the readings he got from high-yield explosive devices. "If I'm not back in 72 hours, she said without looking back, "leave, and send a message to Terran Command that they'll need to glass the planet." The ramp sealed behind her, and Marcus watched through his external cameras as Lieutenant Sarah Chen walked calmly into the twisted nightmare that had consumed New Geneva. She didn't run, didn't sneak, didn't even seem particularly cautious. She simply walked down the main street of the colony as if she were strolling through a peaceful park on Earth. Within minutes, she had disappeared from his sensors entirely, swallowed by the electromagnetic distortions that surrounded the colony. Marcus began his waiting protocol, but found himself running constant analysis on their brief conversations. There had been something in the way she spoke about fear, something in her promise that the entities would learn to be afraid. Most disturbing of all was the realization that, in all his interactions with her, Lieutenant Sarah Chen had never once referred to the transformed colonists as people. She had called them entities, things, targets, as if she had already decided they were no longer human, as if she had already decided what needed to be done. Marcus updated his mission logs and settled in to wait, but his risk assessment protocols continued to run background calculations. By every metric he could measure, he had just deployed the most dangerous human he had ever encountered into a situation that had already killed nearly 4,000 beings. What troubled him most was that he couldn't determine which side posed the greater threat. The first thing Sarah noticed as she walked deeper into New Geneva wasn't the twisted architecture or the pulsing organic growths that covered every surface. It wasn't the way the buildings seemed to breathe, or how the streets curved in directions that hurt to look at directly. It was the silence, not the absence of sound. There were plenty of sounds: wet, sliding noises from the walls, a rhythmic thumping that might have been a heartbeat if hearts were the size of buildings, whispers in languages that predated most civilizations. But there was no fear in the sounds, no panic, no pain. That was wrong. When something this catastrophic happened to a colony, there should be screaming, there should be crying, there should be someone, somewhere, begging for help or calling out for loved ones. The absence of terror was more disturbing than any amount of horror. Sarah's boots made soft squelching sounds as she walked. The ground had been standard prefabricated colony flooring when the diplomatic mission had landed 3 weeks ago. Now it was something else, something that felt organic beneath the thin veneer of synthetic materials. It gave slightly under her weight, like walking on a carpet of flesh. She didn't change her pace or alter her route. She had studied the colony's original layout during the journey, and she was following what had been Main Street toward what had been the administrative center. The fact that the street now curved in impossible directions and seemed to be longer than the entire colony had been wide didn't concern her. She had dealt with spatial anomalies before. The Proxima Centauri incident had involved a similar distortion of normal spacetime. The enemy had used some kind of folding technology to make their base exist in 17 different dimensions simultaneously. Sarah had solved that problem by ignoring the impossible geometry and following the power signatures. Instead, every entity, no matter how advanced or alien, needed energy. Find the energy source, and you found the heart of the operation. She pulled out a small device that looked like a standard military scanner, but had been modified with Terran Black Ops technology. The readings it gave her were fascinating. The entire colony was saturated with an energy signature she'd never seen before, but it wasn't uniform. There were gradients, flows, and most importantly, a source point somewhere near the center of the settlement. As she walked, things began to notice her. They emerged from the twisted buildings slowly, cautiously, as if they weren't quite sure what they were seeing. At first glance, they looked human. 2 arms, 2 legs, a head in roughly the right place. But the details were wrong in ways that made rational thought difficult. Some had too many joints in their limbs, allowing them to bend and flex in directions that should have shattered bones. Others had skin that wasn't quite skin, more like a translucent membrane that showed fluid and organs moving underneath. Their eyes were the worst part. Still recognizably human eyes, but filled with an intelligence that was vast, ancient, and utterly alien. They followed her at a distance, a growing crowd of things that had once been people. They didn't attack, didn't threaten, didn't even seem hostile. They simply watched her with those terrible knowing eyes. Sarah stopped walking and turned to face them. There were 37 of them now, arranged in a loose semicircle about 20 meters away. They had positioned themselves with mathematical precision, each one exactly the same distance from her and from each other. That kind of coordination suggested a hive mind or collective consciousness. "Hello," she said quietly. They didn't respond verbally, but there was a reaction. The organic growths on nearby buildings pulsed brighter, and the whispers in the air grew more intense. She could almost understand them now, as if prolonged exposure was teaching her the language. "You were human once," she continued, studying their faces. Some of them showed recognition at her words, a flicker of what might have been memory. "You were colonists, miners. You came here to build something new." One of them took a step forward. It had been a woman once, probably middle-aged, with graying hair that now moved independent of any wind. When she spoke, her voice was layered, as if multiple people were talking through the same throat. "We are more now," she said. "We have been shown the truth that lies beneath the surface of reality. We have been given purpose beyond the small, brief dreams of individual existence." What purpose is that? The thing that had been a woman smiled with too many teeth. "To prepare the galaxy for what is coming. To make ready the vessels that will carry the truth to every world, every species, every mind that has not yet been opened to the glory of unity." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "The entity in the minds. It's not from this universe, is it? Universe is a limited concept. It exists in all realities simultaneously, has always existed, will always exist. We are merely the first to be blessed with true understanding. And you want to share this understanding with everyone? Want is too small a word. We will share it. We must share it. It is written in the fundamental laws that govern existence itself. Sarah was quiet for a moment, processing this information. The entity was extra-dimensional, possibly extra-universal. It saw reality from a perspective that included multiple planes of existence simultaneously. It was using the colonists as both scouts and propagation vectors, intending to spread its influence throughout the galaxy. Standard containment protocols would be useless against something that existed outside normal spacetime. Conventional weapons would be ineffective against beings that had been fundamentally altered at the molecular level. The Galactic Council's approach of sending diplomats and scientists had been doomed from the start. But Sarah had dealt with extra-dimensional entities before. The key was understanding what they needed to maintain their hold on this reality. Everything had weaknesses, even things that claimed to exist beyond weakness. "Show me," she said finally. The transformed colonists exchanged glances, and their leader tilted her head in a gesture that was still recognizably human despite everything else that had changed about her. "Show you what?" "The source, the entity, the truth you keep talking about." Sarah's voice remained perfectly calm, as if she were asking for directions to the nearest restaurant. "If it's as wonderful as you claim, you should want to share it, right?" For the first time since the conversation began, the colonists looked uncertain. They began whispering among themselves in that strange language that was almost understandable, their voices creating a chorus that seemed to come from the buildings themselves. Finally, their leader spoke again. "The truth is not for unprepared minds. It would destroy you. Try me." The simplicity of the response seemed to confuse them. They had expected fear, resistance, bargaining, pleading, all the normal human responses to an impossible situation. Sarah's complete lack of concern was clearly not something their new collective consciousness knew how to process. "You do not understand," the leader said, and for the first time there was something like concern in her layered voice. "We were changed, slowly, carefully, over days and weeks. Our minds were prepared, our bodies modified gradually to accept the truth. Direct exposure would unmake you completely. That's my risk to take. We cannot allow it. You are too valuable. Your mind shows patterns we have not seen before, structures that could be useful in ways we do not yet fully comprehend." The leader's expression had changed, becoming something that might have been hunger. "We will prepare you properly, change you slowly, help you become what you were meant to be." Sarah sighed quietly. "That's disappointing. I was hoping we could do this the easy way." Before any of the transformed colonists could react, Sarah's hand moved to the weapon at her side. It wasn't the smooth, practiced draw of a soldier. It was something else entirely. Her hand simply appeared to be holding the gun, as if the weapon had materialized there by will alone. The first shot took the leader's center mass, and the effect was immediate and dramatic. Instead of the minimal damage that previous military encounters had reported, the transformed colonist was literally torn apart at the molecular level. Her body dissolved into component atoms with a sound like reality tearing. The other colonists stared in shock that transcended their alien transformation. In their new collective consciousness, they had believed themselves beyond physical harm, elevated above the crude vulnerabilities of mere matter. The fact that one of them had just been completely destroyed by a simple projectile weapon violated everything they thought they knew about their new existence. Sarah shot 6 more of them before they could react, each shot having the same devastating effect. The remaining colonists finally broke from their paralysis and charged her, moving within human speed and coordination. She was faster. The gun in her hand spoke 17 more times in the span of 3 seconds, and 17 more impossible beings ceased to exist. The survivors reached her position and discovered that Sarah Chen was no longer there. She had moved, but not in any direction they could track or follow. One moment she was standing in front of them, the next she was behind their formation, and the gun spoke again. The fight, if it could be called that, lasted less than 30 seconds. When it was over, Sarah was the only living thing on the street, and her weapon was already holstered, as if it had never been drawn. She knelt beside the dissolved remains of the leader and pulled out her scanner. The readings were exactly what she had expected. The projectiles from her weapon weren't standard military ammunition. They were something far more specialized, something that Terran Command had developed for dealing with extra-dimensional threats. Each bullet was infused with what Earth scientists called reality anchors, microscopic devices that forced matter to exist in only one-dimensional space at a time. When they struck something that had been altered to exist across multiple realities simultaneously, the effect was catastrophic. The target was forced to collapse into a single-dimensional state, and since their transformed biology couldn't exist in normal space-time, they simply disintegrated. Sarah stood and continued walking toward the center of the colony. Behind her, the organic growths on the nearby buildings pulsed with agitated rhythms, and the whispers in the air became more urgent. The entity was aware of her now, aware that she was not what she appeared to be. She passed more twisted structures, each one more impossible than the last. Buildings that folded in on themselves, structures that existed in the spaces between other structures, constructions that hurt to look at directly because they occupied more dimensions than human eyes could process. But she navigated through them as if she were walking through the most ordinary suburban neighborhood. The scanner in her hand showed increasing energy concentrations as she approached what had been the colony's administrative center. The source was close now, probably no more than a few hundred meters away, but as she walked, she became aware that she was no longer alone. New figures emerged from the twisted architecture, but these weren't transformed colonists. These were something else entirely, beings that had never been human, never been anything recognizable. They were the entity's true servants, creatures that existed naturally in the spaces between realities. They were beautiful in the way that abstract mathematics was beautiful, perfect geometric forms that shifted and changed as they moved. They approached her from all directions, their movements creating harmony that was audible as well as visible, a symphony of motion that spoke directly to the parts of the brain responsible for pattern recognition. Sarah stopped walking and waited for them to surround her. There were dozens of them, each one unique, but clearly part of a greater whole, Teddy. When they spoke, it was with a voice that came from everywhere and nowhere, a sound that bypassed the ears entirely and resonated in the bones. "You are not what you appear to be," they said in perfect unison. "You carry weapons that should not exist, knowledge that has not been shared, purpose that extends beyond your species' understanding." That's correct. You have destroyed our prepared vessels, our carefully crafted servants. You have used forces that violate the natural order to unmake beings that have been elevated beyond physical limitation. Also correct, the geometric beings shifted and flowed, their forms becoming more complex, more beautiful, and somehow more threatening. We have examined your mind from a distance. Your thoughts are unusual. Most beings think in linear patterns, following predictable paths from stimulus to response. Your mind operates differently. You think like a predator, but not as your species typically defines the term. Sarah tilted her head slightly, the first sign of genuine interest she had shown since landing. "How do I think?" "You think like something that exists to end other things. Your entire consciousness is structured around the concept of termination, not survival, not reproduction, not even dominance, simply ending. You are a weapon that has achieved sentience, a tool of destruction that has learned to operate independently. Is that a problem?" The beings flowed closer, their harmonious movement creating patterns that were almost hypnotizing. "We are curious. Our kind exists to create unity, to bring all consciousness into harmony with the greater truth. But you exist to create termination, to bring all things to endings that serve no purpose beyond their own completion. We should be enemies." Another voice joined the harmony. "Your nature is antithetical to ours. Yet you intrigue us. A being devoted entirely to ending could serve purposes we had not previously considered. Sarah's hand rested near her weapon, but she made no move to draw it. Such as, there are other entities in the spaces between realities. Beings whose purposes conflict with ours, whose unity would corrupt the harmony we seek to create. They require termination, but we are creators, not destroyers. We lack the conceptual framework necessary for true ending. You want to recruit me? We want to understand you. If understanding leads to cooperation, that would serve both our purposes. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, considering the implications. An extra-dimensional entity that saw her as a potential ally rather than a threat was a new experience. Most beings either feared her or tried to use her. Very few tried to negotiate with her as an equal. "Show me the source," she said finally. "Let me see what you really are. Then we can discuss cooperation." The geometric beings exchanged communications in frequencies that human ears couldn't detect. Finally, their leader, or possibly their spokesperson, since they seemed to operate as a collective, "Very well, but understand that direct contact with our true form will change you. Not as we changed the colonists, gradually and carefully, but instantly and completely. You will become something beyond human, beyond individual consciousness. You will become part of our purpose." Sarah smiled, that same unpleasant smile she had shown in the briefing room. "That assumes I'm still human to begin with." The comment sent ripples of uncertainty through the collective consciousness of the geometric beings. They had been analyzing her since she entered the colony, trying to understand what she was, how she functioned, but her statement suggested that their analysis had been fundamentally flawed from the beginning. "What are you?" they asked, and for the first time since the conversation began, there was something like fear in their harmony. Sarah began walking again, and the geometric beings flowed around her like a living escort. "I'm the thing that comes after everything else ends," she said quietly. "I'm what happens when humanity realizes that the universe is too dangerous for anything else to be allowed to exist in it. That is not possible. No single species could develop something like that. The mathematics of consciousness don't allow for such focused, destructive capacity in an individual being." "You're right," Sarah agreed. "No species could develop something like me naturally. But humanity doesn't do anything naturally. We cheat. We break the rules. We find ways to make impossible things happen because we're too stubborn to accept that they're impossible." They had reached the center of the colony now, where the administrative building had once stood. In its place was something that existed in more dimensions than had names. It was beautiful and terrible, a structure that seemed to contain infinite space within a finite volume, surfaces that folded through realities like origami made of space-time itself. At its heart was the entity, and Sarah finally understood what they were dealing with. It wasn't a being in any sense that most minds could comprehend. It was more like a concept that had achieved independent existence, an idea so powerful and complete that it had begun to remake reality in its own image. "Impressive," she said, and meant it. "How long has it been trying to break through into normal space?" "Time is not a relevant concept for us," the geometric beings replied. "We exist in all moments simultaneously. But if we were to translate our existence into linear temporal terms that your mind could process, we have been working to establish this foothold for approximately 3 million years. The energy signatures were beyond anything in known science, but they followed patterns that her modified equipment could track and analyze. At the very center of the structure, buried in dimensions that normal matter couldn't access, was something that looked almost mundane. A simple crystalline formation, probably no larger than a human fist. It pulsed with the same rhythm as the organic growths throughout the colony, and every energy reading she took pointed to it as the source of everything. "That's it," she said, not really asking. "That's your anchor point. The thing that lets you exist in normal space-time." The geometric beings suddenly stopped their fluid motion. How could you possibly know that? Sarah holstered her scanner and began walking toward the impossible structure. Because I've seen this before. Different entity, different dimension, same basic principle. You exist in spaces between realities, which means you need something to hold you in place when you try to operate in normal space-time. Usually, it's a physical object that's been modified to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. You cannot reach it. The path to our anchor exists in dimensions your species cannot perceive, let alone navigate. Sarah paused at the base of the structure and looked up at its impossible geometry. Probably not, but I don't need to reach it. She pulled out her sidearm again, and the geometric beings suddenly surged forward in alarm. Wait. If you damage the anchor while it is actively maintaining our presence here, the dimensional cascade could destroy this entire star system. I know. Sarah's voice was perfectly calm. That's why I brought these. She drew a second weapon, something that looked like a standard military grenade but clearly wasn't. The geometric being's harmony became discordant, filled with frequencies that suggested panic. Dimensional singularity charges, Sarah explained conversationally. They create a localized pocket of space-time that exists independently of normal reality. Anything caught in the field gets cut off from external dimensional influences. She activated the device and it began to emit a low humming sound, very useful for containing extra-dimensional entities. The geometric beings tried to flee, but found that their ability to move between dimensions had been severed. They were trapped in normal space-time, reduced to existing in only 3 spatial dimensions and 1 temporal dimension. "This is impossible!" they screamed, their harmony collapsing into chaos. "No species has the technology to manipulate space-time at this level." Humanity does now. We learned it from the last extra-dimensional entity that thought it could use our reality as a stepping stone to somewhere else. The charge detonated silently, creating a sphere of twisted space-time that engulfed the entire center of the colony. The impossible structure collapsed inward on itself as its anchor was cut off from the dimensions that sustained it. The entity's true form was trapped in normal space, where physical laws applied and conceptual beings couldn't exist. It lasted approximately 3 seconds before it simply ceased. The geometric beings dissolved like smoke, their existence dependent on connection to their creator. The organic growths throughout the colony withered and died, reverting to normal matter that obeyed conventional physics. The twisted buildings straightened themselves, returning to their original prefabricated configurations. Sarah stood in the center of what was once again a normal colonial administrative center, holstering her weapons as if she had just completed routine maintenance. Around her, the colony of New Geneva slowly returned to looking like a human settlement instead of a nightmare from beyond reality. She activated her communicator. Marcus, this is Chen. Mission complete. I'll need pickup in 6 hours. Lieutenant! The AI's voice carried what sounded like relief. Are you injured? Do you require medical assistance? Just need time to complete the site survey and file my report. The entity has been neutralized? Sarah looked around at the normal, boring prefabricated buildings that surrounded her. There is no entity. There never was an entity. Just a dimensional incursion that got out of hand. What about the colonists? Sarah's expression didn't change. What colonists processed this for several seconds? Lieutenant, there were over 2,000 people living in New Geneva when the incident began. No, Sarah said quietly. There were over 2,000 things wearing human faces. The people died the moment they were exposed to extra-dimensional influence. What came after weren't colonists anymore. She cut the communication and began her survey, methodically documenting everything she found. The crystalline anchor had been completely destroyed, leaving only trace elements that would be indistinguishable from common mining residue. The dimensional distortions had collapsed, returning local space-time to normal parameters. There was no evidence that anything unusual had ever happened here. As she worked, Sarah thought about the conversation she'd had with the entity's servants. They had called her a weapon that had achieved sentience, a tool of destruction that operated independently. They hadn't been entirely wrong. Humanity had created her during the Proxima Centauri incident, when first contact had gone very, very wrong. The Proxima Centaurians had been shapeshifters, beings that could mimic human appearance perfectly while slowly replacing entire populations. By the time Earth realized what was happening, half the colony worlds had been compromised. The solution had been Project Terminus. Create a human who could identify and eliminate existential threats to the species, regardless of how impossible or well-hidden those threats might be. Someone who could make the hard choices that committees and councils could never make. Someone who could do what needed to be done, no matter how terrible it might be. They had succeeded beyond their wildest dreams. Sarah Chen was the perfect predator, designed specifically to hunt things that shouldn't exist. Her mind had been modified to think in ways that could comprehend extra-dimensional entities. Her body enhanced to survive environments that would kill normal humans. Her weapons and equipment created using technologies that most of the galaxy had never imagined. But, perhaps most importantly, they had removed her ability to form emotional attachments that might interfere with her mission parameters. She couldn't love, couldn't hate, couldn't fear. She could only assess threats and eliminate them. The Galactic Council thought they had requested help from humanity. What they had actually done was deploy the most dangerous weapon their species had ever created. Sarah Chen wasn't a soldier or a diplomat or a scientist. She was extinction, given human form and pointed at problems that required permanent solutions. As she finished her survey and prepared to signal for pickup, Sarah reflected on the entity's final words. They had called her a being devoted entirely to ending, someone whose existence served no purpose beyond termination. They had been correct about that much. But what they hadn't understood was that sometimes ending things was exactly what the universe needed. Sarah Chen packed her equipment and walked back toward the landing zone where Marcus would collect her. Behind her, the colony of New Geneva sat silent and empty, waiting for new colonists who would never know how close they had come to becoming something else entirely. In 72 hours, she would be sitting in another briefing room, listening to another crisis that threatened galactic stability. She would take the last seat at the table, and she would say nothing unless spoken to. And if the problem required it, she would once again become the thing that entities from beyond reality learned to fear. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened aboard the massive space station Unity's Heart exactly 18 hours after the first reports came in from the Vegan sector. Admiral Korath looked like he had aged a decade in the 3 weeks since the Kepler 442b incident, his golden scales now completely dull and his bioluminescent patches flickering erratically with stress patterns that bordered on panic. The situation reports painted a picture that defied rational explanation. 7 different star systems, spread across 4 sectors, had gone completely silent within a 6-hour window. No distress signals, no final transmissions, no automated emergency beacons. Over 2 billion beings had simply vanished from galactic communications as if they had never existed. The pattern is unlike anything we've encountered before, reported Dr. Yithrak, her insectoid form trembling as she manipulated the holographic display. Each system went dark in sequence, starting with the outermost colonies and working inward toward the primary worlds. But the timing suggests coordination that should be impossible across such distances. Representative Vorth of the crystalline hegemony flickered between translucent and opaque as his emotional state fluctuated. Our long-range sensors show no signs of warfare, no debris fields, no energy signatures that would indicate massive destruction. The planets are still there, the space stations remain in their orbits, but there are no life signs anywhere. Could this be related to the Kepler 442b situation? Asked the Mentari delegate, his ancient voice carrying undertones of deep concern. The entity was eliminated, but perhaps it had already seeded other locations. Lieutenant Chen's dimensional singularity charges would have severed any connections to other anchor points. Her report was very specific about the complete termination of extra-dimensional influence. As if summoned by the mention of her name, the briefing room doors opened and Sarah Chen walked in. She moved with the same quiet efficiency she had displayed 3 weeks earlier, taking the same seat at the end of the table without acknowledging the assembled delegates. But something was different this time. The various alien representatives found themselves unconsciously shifting away from her, as if some instinct they couldn't name was warning them that proximity to the small human was dangerous. Even the Mentari delegate, whose species had faced cosmic horrors for millions of years, seemed uncomfortable in her presence. "Lieutenant," Admiral Korath began, "thank you for responding so quickly to our emergency summons. As you can see from the preliminary reports, it's not an invasion," Sarah interrupted quietly. The room fell silent. Her voice had that same gentle quality it always carried, but there was something underneath it now that made several delegates check their personal protection devices. Dr. Yithrak's compound eyes focused on her with scientific curiosity. "Lieutenant, you haven't had time to review the data. How could you possibly? Because I've seen this before. Different scale, same methodology." Sarah's brown eyes swept across the assembled beings with that same unsettling neutrality. "This isn't an external threat. This is internal conversion." Admiral Korath leaned forward, his scales rippling with anxiety. "Conversion to what?" "Hive mind. Someone or something has developed a technology that can convert entire populations into components of a collective consciousness. The reason there were no distress signals is because the conversion process makes the targets want to be converted." The Vraxian delegate's tentacles coiled in distress. "That's impossible. No known technology could affect multiple species across interstellar distances simultaneously. The biological and neurological differences between our various races would make universal conversion impossible." Sarah's expression didn't change. "Unless the conversion doesn't target biology. Unless it targets something more fundamental." "What could be more fundamental than biological consciousness?" asked the crystalline representative. "Quantum consciousness. The base-level quantum entanglements that allow individual minds to maintain coherent thought patterns." Sarah stood and moved to the holographic display, manipulating the controls with practiced efficiency. Most species think consciousness is generated by brain chemistry, but the real foundation is quantum mechanical. Every thinking being maintains a unique quantum signature that defines individual identity. The display showed a complex three-dimensional model of quantum field interactions. Sarah highlighted specific patterns within the model, patterns that seemed to pulse with their own internal rhythm. If something can manipulate quantum entanglement on a large scale, it can override individual consciousness by forcing quantum signatures to synchronize. The target doesn't die, doesn't get replaced, doesn't even know anything has changed. They simply become part of something larger while retaining all their memories and most of their personality. Yithrak studied the display with growing alarm. The implications of that are staggering. A hive mind that retains individual knowledge and skills while eliminating personal desires and independent thought. Each converted being would become a perfect agent, completely loyal but seemingly unchanged. "Which is why there were no distress signals," Sarah continued. "From their perspective, nothing bad happened to them. They've simply been enlightened, made part of something wonderful. They want others to experience the same enlightenment." The Mentari delegate spoke slowly, his ancient voice heavy with recognition. "We have seen whispers of such things in the deepest archives. Theoretical technologies developed by species that vanished before most current civilizations arose. But the power requirements would be enormous, and the precision needed to affect quantum fields across interstellar distances, and they're using it." Admiral Korath activated his command interface, bringing up tactical displays of the affected systems. "Lieutenant, if your assessment is correct, we're facing a threat that could consume the entire galaxy." How do we fight an enemy that can convert our own people into willing servants? Sarah studied the tactical displays for several minutes, her expression unreadable. When she finally spoke, her words sent a chill through every being in the room. You don't fight this kind of enemy. You cauterize it. What does that mean exactly? Asked the Vraxian delegate, though his tone suggested he didn't want to know the answer. It means we identify the source of the quantum manipulation technology and destroy it completely, along with everything it's already converted. Sarah's voice remained perfectly calm, as if she were discussing routine maintenance procedures. Hive minds spread exponentially. Every converted being becomes a vector for further conversion. If we try to contain it or study it or negotiate with it, we lose. The room erupted in voices of protest and disbelief. The idea of destroying entire star systems, of writing off billions of converted beings as acceptable losses, was contrary to everything the Galactic Council stood for. That's genocide! Dr. Yithrak's voice cracked with horror. Those beings were converted, not killed. They might still be saved if we can find a way to reverse the process. Sarah turned to look at her directly. Doctor, in your professional opinion, what would happen if we attempted to forcibly reverse quantum entanglement synchronization in a converted mind? Dr. Yithrak opened her mouth to respond, then stopped as the implications of the question hit her. The quantum disruption would cause catastrophic neural cascade failure, complete brain death within seconds, so they're already dead. We're just discussing whether to acknowledge that fact or pretend otherwise while the infection spreads. The crystalline representative flickered rapidly between states, his emotional distress creating visible distortions in his matrix. There has to be another way, some alternative that doesn't require the destruction of entire civilizations. Sarah returned to her seat and folded her hands in her lap. There is no alternative. This is a binary situation. Either we stop it now, completely and permanently, or we all become part of it eventually. How can you be so certain? The Mentari delegate asked. Your species is young, your experience with cosmic threats limited. Surely there are options you haven't considered. For the first time since entering the room, Sarah smiled. It was not a pleasant expression, and several delegates instinctively moved further away from her. Because 3 days ago I received a message from Lieutenant Sarah Chen of the Terran Colonial Marines, she said quietly. The room fell completely silent. Admiral Korath's bioluminescent patches went dark entirely, and Dr. Yithrak's compound eyes widened in confusion. That's impossible, Korath whispered. You're Lieutenant Sarah Chen. No, Sarah replied, her voice carrying an edge that made the air in the room seem to vibrate with threat. I was Lieutenant Sarah Chen. The being that sent me that message is also Lieutenant Sarah Chen, as are the 17 other versions of me that have been activated across the galaxy in response to this crisis. The implications of her statement hit the assembled delegates like a physical blow. Dr. Yithrak was the first to find her voice. Clones? But human cloning technology isn't advanced enough to... Not clones. Copies. Perfect quantum state duplicates created using technology that humanity acquired during the Rigel Pirate War. Sarah's expression remained neutral, but there was something in her posture that suggested barely contained violence. When we realized that galactic threats were escalating beyond our ability to respond with single agents, we developed the Hydra Protocol. Admiral Korath's voice was barely audible. How many? Each one with identical memories, identical training, identical mission parameters. Sarah stood again, and several delegates involuntarily backed away from her. Sarah Chen, that eliminated the Kepler 442b entity, is currently investigating quantum disturbances in the Centauri sector. Another is tracking unusual energy signatures near the galactic core. I was activated specifically to handle this hive mind situation. This is monstrous, the Vraxian delegate whispered, creating an army of identical weapons, each one capable of destroying entire civilizations. This is necessary, Sarah corrected. The galaxy is full of threats that require permanent solutions. Committees and councils can't provide those solutions because they're paralyzed by concepts like morality and proportional response. So humanity created something that could. She moved to the tactical display and began highlighting specific systems within the affected areas. The quantum manipulation technology requires enormous power generation and precise targeting systems. Based on the pattern of conversions, the source is most likely located here. She indicated a system at the center of the affected region, probably the Sigma Draconis system. It has the industrial capacity to build the necessary equipment and the stellar configuration to provide the power. Dr. Yithrak studied the display with growing understanding and horror. You're planning to destroy an entire star system based on tactical speculation. I'm planning to destroy the source of an existential threat to galactic civilization. The fact that it will require eliminating everything in a 12-light-year radius is an acceptable side effect. The Mentari delegate's ancient voice carried undertones of recognition and fear. We have encountered your kind before, haven't we? Not humans, but beings like you. Entities created by species that faced extinction-level threats. Sarah nodded slowly. The Andromedans created something similar when they faced the Void Plague. The Magellan Confederacy built their own version during the Recursive War. Most species, when pushed far enough, eventually realize that survival requires the creation of things that exist beyond normal moral constraints. And what happened to those species? Asked the crystalline representative. They survived. Their enemies didn't. Admiral Korath activated his command protocols, and the room was suddenly filled with security personnel from a dozen different species. Each one carried weapons designed to neutralize the most dangerous known threats, and they formed a loose circle around Sarah's position. Lieutenant Chen, Korath said formally, by the authority vested in me by the Galactic Council, I am placing you under protective custody pending a full investigation of your status and mission parameters. She simply looked at Admiral Korath with the same neutral expression she brought to everything else. Admiral, she said quietly, you have two choices. You can let me complete my mission and save what's left of galactic civilization, or you can try to stop me and discover why humanity didn't send just one Sarah Chen to handle this crisis. The voices that spoke were identical, each one carrying the same gentle tone and neutral inflection that had become associated with humanity's ultimate weapon. Admiral Korath, this is Lieutenant Sarah Chen aboard the vessel Silent Running, currently approaching the outer system of Sigma Draconis. I am prepared to begin sterilization protocols. Admiral Korath, this is Lieutenant Sarah Chen investigating the quantum disturbance near Vega. I have confirmed hive mind activity and am requesting permission to deploy dimensional singularity charges. Admiral Korath, this is Lieutenant Sarah Chen, conducting reconnaissance in the Tau Ceti system. The conversion process is accelerating. Recommend immediate implementation of cauterization protocols. The voices continued. 17 different Sarah Chens reporting from 17 different locations throughout the galaxy. B. Each one was investigating similar threats, each one reaching the same conclusions, each one requesting permission to deploy weapons that could sterilize entire sectors. The security personnel looked at Admiral Korath uncertainly. Their weapons were designed to handle single targets, not distributed threats that existed in multiple locations simultaneously. Sarah stood in the center of the room, completely untroubled by the weapons pointed at her. As I said, Admiral, two choices. Let me complete my mission, or discover why humanity created so many of me. Yithrak's voice was barely a whisper. How many of you are there? As many as necessary, Sarah replied. But if you force us to operate independently without council oversight or coordination, the collateral damage will be significantly higher. We prefer to work within existing governmental structures when possible. And if it's not possible, Sarah's smile returned, and this time it carried implications that made several delegates physically ill. Then we work within whatever structures remain after we've eliminated the threats to galactic stability. Admiral Korath stared at her for a long moment, then gestured for his security personnel to lower their weapons. What do you need? Full authorization to deploy whatever weapons I deem necessary, and an understanding that some problems require permanent solutions. The Mentari delegate spoke slowly, his ancient voice heavy with resignation. You are asking us to authorize the destruction of potentially billions of beings who might still be saved. Sarah corrected. The hive mind has already taken 7 systems. In another week, it will have taken 70. In a month, it will have consumed half the galaxy. The beings it converts aren't suffering. They're happy, fulfilled, part of something greater than themselves. But they're also no longer the species they were born as. She moved to the central display and called up a real-time image of one of the affected systems. The planets were still there, the space station still functional, but the energy signatures showed massive construction projects underway on every world. They're building transmission arrays, quantum manipulation devices designed to extend their conversion range. Every day we delay gives them more power, more reach, more ability to force other systems to join their collective consciousness. Yithrak studied the energy readings with growing alarm. The power requirements for those arrays, they're drawing energy directly from their star. If they complete construction, they'll be able to convert entire sectors simultaneously, Sarah finished. Which is why this is a binary decision. Stop them now, or join them eventually. The room fell silent as the assembled delegates contemplated the implications. They were being asked to authorize genocide, to prevent assimilation, to choose the extinction of billions over the absorption of trillions. Finally, the Mentari delegate spoke. There is wisdom in your words, Saracen, and there is horror. The fact that you can speak of such things without emotion or hesitation suggests that your creators understood something about the nature of survival that we have been reluctant to acknowledge. Which is that sometimes the price of preserving what you value is becoming something you would normally despise. Sarah nodded once. Humanity learned that lesson during our first contact with the Proxima Centaurians. We tried diplomacy. We tried negotiation. We tried accommodation. None of it worked. In the end, we had to choose between remaining human and remaining alive, and you chose survival. We chose to create something that could choose survival for us, so that the rest of humanity could continue to believe in concepts like mercy and proportional response. Admiral Korath activated his command authority and began transmitting orders to his fleet commanders. You have authorization, Lieutenant. Do what needs to be done. Sarah moved toward the exit, then paused at the door. Admiral, there's something else you should know. The quantum signature analysis suggests that the hive mind technology is based on research that was stolen from Terran archives 6 months ago. Are you saying that humans created the technology that's now threatening the galaxy? I'm saying that humans created the technology to defend against exactly this kind of threat. Someone stole it and reversed the polarity. Instead of protecting individual consciousness from external influence, they're using it to override individual consciousness with collective will. The implications of that statement settled over the room like a toxic cloud. Not only were they facing an existential threat to galactic civilization, but that threat was based on weapons technology that humanity had developed in secret. Dr. Yithrak's voice cracked with accusation. Your species has been developing weapons capable of controlling the quantum foundations of consciousness without sharing that research with the galactic scientific community? Sarah's expression didn't change. My species has been developing defenses against every possible threat to our survival. The fact that those defenses can be weaponized isn't our responsibility. The fact that someone stole them and is using them against the galaxy is. She left the briefing room without another word, moving through the corridors of the space station with the same quiet efficiency she brought to everything else. Behind her, the assembled delegates began the process of authorizing humanity's ultimate weapon to implement a solution that would save the galaxy by destroying a significant portion of it. As Sarah walked toward the docking bay where her transport waited, she reflected on the conversation with the council delegates. They still thought in terms of individual morality, personal responsibility, proportional response, quote, they couldn't comprehend the mathematics of survival at galactic scales, but that was why humanity had created the Sarah Chen Protocol. Someone had to think in terms of acceptable losses and necessary evils. Someone had to make the choices that democratic governments and moral beings couldn't make. 17 versions of her were already moving towards 17 different objectives throughout the galaxy. Each one carried weapons that could sterilize worlds, technologies that could reshape reality itself, and mission parameters that placed species survival above all other considerations. The hive mind had made a fundamental error in its assessment of galactic threats. It had assumed that its conversion technology was unstoppable because no normal military force could counter it. But Sarah Chen wasn't a normal military force. She was extinction given human form, designed specifically to solve problems that couldn't be solved by any other means. A hive mind was about to learn what humanity's enemies always learned eventually, that there was no threat so terrible, no enemy so powerful, no problem so complex that humans wouldn't find a way to kill it. And if killing it required becoming monsters themselves, then humanity would create monsters capable of acting on their behalf. The transport ship Event Horizon dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Sigma Draconis system exactly 36 hours after Sarah received authorization from the Galactic Council. Unlike her previous mission, she wasn't alone this time. The ship carried a full complement of monitoring equipment, recording devices, and communication arrays that would document everything that happened for the historical records. Admiral Korath had insisted on the documentation, not out of any desire for transparency, but because he suspected that what they were about to witness would fundamentally change how galactic civilization approached existential threats. If Sarah Chen succeeded, the Galactic Council would have proof that humanity's approach to impossible problems could work. If she failed, they would have data about her capabilities and limitations that might be useful for future encounters. What they found at Sigma Draconis defied every prediction their scientists had made. The system was alive in ways that violated basic understanding of stellar mechanics. The star itself pulsed with artificial rhythms, its fusion reactions controlled and directed by massive orbital installations that had been constructed from the raw material of 3 former planets. Energy flowed between the installations in visible streams, creating a web of power that encompassed the entire system. At the center of this web, where the system's primary world had once orbited, was something that pushed the boundaries of known engineering. It appeared to be a single structure, but it existed on a scale that made planet-sized constructions look like toys. Sarah's sensors suggested it was approximately the size of Earth's moon, but it occupied space in ways that made traditional measurements meaningless. "Lieutenant," came Admiral Korath's voice through the communication array. "Our long-range sensors are having difficulty analyzing the central structure. It appears to be phasing in and out of normal space-time." After studying, Sarah stood at the observation deck of the Event Horizon, studying the impossible vista before them. It's existing in multiple dimensional states simultaneously. The hive mind isn't just manipulating quantum consciousness. It's using that manipulation to alter the fundamental structure of reality in local space. Possible, apparently. Sarah's voice carried that same neutral tone, but there was something underneath it that suggested she was recalculating her mission parameters. The quantum entanglement technology they stole from human archives wasn't just about consciousness control. It was part of a larger research program into reality manipulation. Through the ship's enhanced sensors, they could see movement throughout the system. Ships moved between the orbital installations with perfect coordination, their courses plotted with mathematical precision that spoke of collective consciousness. But these weren't the converted beings from the other systems. These were something new, The ships themselves were wrong. They flowed like liquid metal, changing shape as they moved, adapting their configurations to match their immediate needs. Some were small, no larger than fighter craft, while others rivaled capital ships in size. But they all moved with the same unified purpose, as if they were extensions of a single vast organism. The conversion process has evolved, Sarah observed, watching the ships flow through space like schools of mechanical fish. They're not just converting individual consciousness anymore. They're converting matter itself, turning raw materials into extensions of the collective will. Lieutenant, our tactical computers can't track individual vessels. Their movement patterns are too complex, too coordinated. It's like trying to count the cells in a living organism. Sarah activated her personal equipment, scanning the system with sensors that had been designed to analyze threats beyond conventional understanding. What she found was both fascinating and terrifying. The entire system has become a single entity. The star, the orbital installations, the ships, probably even the space between them. It's all one organism now, one consciousness distributed across billions of components. How do we fight something like that? We don't fight it. We perform surgery. Sarah moved to the ship's tactical station and began inputting coordinates for their approach. The event horizon would need to get within the system's outer defensive perimeter to deploy her equipment, but conventional stealth technology would be useless against an entity that existed partially outside normal spacetime. Plot a course for the fourth orbital installation, she instructed the ship's navigation computer. Maximum stealth configuration, minimal energy emissions. Lieutenant, that installation is heavily defended. Our sensors show massive weapon emplacements and what appears to be a fleet of those liquid ships, which is exactly why we need to approach it directly. The hive mind's greatest strength is also its greatest weakness. It thinks as a unified entity. It can't conceive of tactics that don't serve the collective good. Teddy. As the event horizon began its approach, Sarah prepared her equipment. This mission would require different tools than her previous encounters. The dimensional singularity charges that had worked against the Kepler 442b entity would be insufficient against something this large and complex. Instead, she was carrying something that humanity had hoped never to use. Project Ouroboros had been developed during the early days of Terran expansion, when human scientists first began to understand the true dangers that existed in deep space. It was based on a simple premise. If humanity ever encountered a threat that was too large to destroy by conventional means, they would need a weapon that could use the threat's own power against it. The Ouroboros device was roughly the size of a briefcase, but it contained technology that could manipulate the fundamental forces that held reality together. When activated, it would create a cascade failure in the quantum entanglement networks that the hive mind was using to maintain control over matter and energy. The effect would be instantaneous and absolute. Every converted being, every transformed ship, every modified structure would revert to its original state simultaneously. The collective consciousness would collapse, and the individuals within it would experience the quantum equivalent of sudden cardiac arrest. It was genocide on a scale that dwarfed anything in recorded galactic history, but it was also the only weapon that could stop the hive mind before it consumed the galaxy. As they approached the fourth orbital installation, the defensive response was immediate and overwhelming. Hundreds of the liquid ships flowed toward them, their forms shifting and adapting to present optimal weapon configurations. Energy beams that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously lanced out toward the event horizon, each one calibrated to disrupt different aspects of the ship's defensive systems. "Evasive maneuvers," Sarah ordered, but her voice carried no stress or urgency. She might have been ordering tea instead of attempting to survive an assault that would have vaporized most military vessels. The event horizon twisted through space with grace that seemed impossible for something its size. Its pilot, a human military AI called Athena, had been programmed specifically for this type of mission. Every evasion, every course correction, every defensive action was calculated to bring them closer to their target while presenting the most difficult targeting profile possible. "Lieutenant, we're taking heavy fire. Our shields won't hold much longer against weapons that exist in multiple dimensions. How long until we reach deployment range?" 37 seconds at current approach speed. "That's sufficient." Sarah activated the Ouroboros device, and the briefcase-sized weapon began to hum with energies that made her enhanced sensors scream warnings about dimensional instability. The device was already beginning to affect local space-time, creating ripples that propagated outward at faster-than-light speeds. The liquid ships attacking them suddenly stopped their assault, as if they had sensed something that required their immediate attention. They began to retreat, flowing back toward the orbital installations with movements that suggested panic, an emotion that shouldn't have been possible for components of a collective consciousness. "They know what you're carrying," Admiral Korath's voice came through the communication array, filled with something that might have been awe or horror. "Whatever that device is, they recognize it as an existential threat. Athena, bring us to full stop. Deploy all stealth systems and maintain position." The event horizon suddenly became invisible to most forms of detection, its advanced stealth technology rendering it effectively transparent to conventional sensors. But Sarah suspected that the hive mind's perception extended beyond normal electromagnetic spectrums. She was proved correct when a voice spoke directly through the ship's communication systems, bypassing all security protocols and encryption. It was a voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once, composed of thousands of individual speakers all perfectly synchronized. "We know what you are, Sarah Chen of the Terran species. We know what you carry, and we know what you intend to do with it." Sarah activated her personal communicator. "Then you know why I'm here. We know that you represent a choice your species made long ago, when you decided that survival was more important than morality. We know that you are the weapon they created to solve problems that could not be solved by democratic process or ethical consideration." "That's correct. We also know that the technology you carry will not have the effect you believe it will. Our quantum entanglement networks have evolved beyond the parameters of the original human research. We have incorporated safeguards, redundancies, adaptive protocols that will allow us to survive your weapon." Sarah smiled, and though no one could see her expression, something about her posture suggested that this was exactly what she had been hoping to hear. "Are you certain about that? We have run millions of simulations. In every scenario, your Ouroboros device succeeds in disrupting our primary networks, but fails to achieve total termination. Sufficient components will survive to rebuild, and we will emerge stronger and more resistant to further attacks." "Interesting. And what percentage of your current structure would survive the cascade failure?" There was a pause that lasted several seconds, during which the liquid ships around them maintained their retreat formations but made no aggressive moves. "Approximately 12% of our distributed consciousness would remain intact, enough to preserve our core identity and essential functions." Sarah's smile widened. "That's what I was counting on." Before the hive mind could respond, Sarah activated a second device that she had concealed within,